Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Evan Glazer. I'm the principal of Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology, and I am grateful to welcome you to our school. This is the first use of our auditorium that's been recently renovated with padded seats. More seats, in fact. It hasn't officially been released because we don't yet have our official screen. You can see we have a makeshift screen to use until the actual screen gets installed. Today's event is a celebration of the life of Betty STEGALL. It's a great coincidence that we're doing this over Thanksgiving weekend, because Betty is certainly someone who we have to thank for being such a great influence in our lives and so many students. I think you're going to hear that through a lot of stories from folks today in our program. You'll hear from colleagues who have worked with Betty as well as a former student, and I'll provide some personal reflections. And we have some videos of Betty and her talking about TJ, and also reminiscing on the history of our school and how valuable that was to her and preserving that. Once that program is finished, then anyone in the audience will have a chance to come on up and make some remarks and talk about the impact of Ms. STEGALL. Just such a wonderful, wonderful lady who worked at TJ for more than 30 years, and in Fairfax County close to 50 years. Just a remarkable commitment and influence. So first I'd like to play a video that was first filmed when the Washingtonian profiled TJ in one of its magazines, and then Betty was interviewed to talk about what made TJ special.
I think the school was built on excitement. Excitement for learning, excitement for teaching, excitement for being there. Everything that was done in the very beginning was motivated and fueled by excitement. I think it is a model for the nation. I think the school, the way the teachers dedicate themselves, if other schools picked it up and raised the bar and brought in things that would interest and motivate the kids, I think that alone would motivate higher academic standards throughout the nation. In the beginning, I remember when they first started out, they realized the kids were academically oriented, and there was a concern, will they be good enough to compete? Well, I think they answered that pretty quickly by having several district champions that first year. The kids do the same thing they did in academics. They put themselves into it. They may not be the very best athlete out there, but they become the best because of their dedication to it. With the students are there to learn. They have no problem being nerds, but they are also regular kids. They love to play. You should be there for homecoming, because it's one of the most exciting weeks of the whole year. My gosh, homecoming starts out, it goes for a whole week, and you sort of give up classes. Each day, there's a different theme for that day, and the students all dress, and you should see the costumes. They go all out, and they don't do it for one, they do it for all 5 days. And it's a contagious excitement that everybody gets involved in. I just think it's such a unique school. It's been such a wonderful experience, not only for me, but for everybody. You'll hear that from everybody who's gone through Jefferson. So I just think if something is as wonderful as Jefferson, we need to record how it evolved and how it happened. I'm doing it because I love Jefferson, and I want to record the history of how it came about. It's a story that should be told, because it's a story of success. Who doesn't want to tell a story of success?
What we'll do is transition in the program. Kate Garnbacher has a slideshow that she'll set up while I make a few more remarks before we transition to Carolyn Geekin, one of Betty's colleagues, in making some remarks. So there's a few thank yous I'd like to make. First, I want to recognize the people who are responsible for putting together the program. So Judy Garnbacher and Pat Groves, thank you for what you did coming together and making sure we had this event. Kate Grumbacher for creating a slideshow. I would like to thank our tech crew, Pete Maraska, to make sure that the auditorium was ready even when it wasn't ready, and also the opportunity to record this event so that we can share this with others, you know, so that your comments can be remembered and shared with people who couldn't be here today. So please, oh, and one very important thank you I don't want to miss is the TJ String Quartet, who came in on a Saturday to perform, to kind of set the ambiance out in the auditorium lobby. So let's thank all of them for all their help. So as we hear some remarks, we'll see some pictures that are of Betty and also taken by Betty, just so that we can cherish some of the memories that we had with her. First, I'd like to call up Carolyn Geekin, who was a colleague of Betty, who taught humanities at our school and certainly got to know Betty very deeply. Carolyn?
Hi. I'm very pleased to be able to talk to you a little bit about Betty. My association with her goes all the way back to 1964, when she taught at Fairfax High School, the original Fairfax High School, the best Fairfax High School, as she would agree with me. And she came, and I was not able to be her pupil because I was a senior. And she had started her teaching career, she graduated in 1961, I believe, from Longwood. And I was in my senior year, 64, 65. But she was quite a popular young teacher because it seemed to me at the time that all the faculty, with very few exceptions, was about 150 years old each. And she was this blonde sprite of a woman who came in slender, athletic, peppy, happy, funny, and she got involved with the runners on the track team. She was beloved by her students, and her reputation got around. Then I graduated, and I didn't see Betty again until sometime in the mid-90s, when she came back to TJ. And what I didn't know until someone informed me that she had been at TJ, the old TJ, and in fact, one of her colleagues is here, a close personal friend, Tom Kelleher, in the back. And Tom, I'm really glad came to visit, and he is the brother of one of my neighbors who lived behind me. And I was quite, I guess it was about 10 years ago, 10 or 11 years ago, I ran into Betty in their front yard at a 4th of July picnic, and where they closed down the street, and the kids play, and Betty was coming to these events, and she became a beloved member of the street gang on Dinwiddie, and was befriended by the neighbors there, and she loved their kids. And so she had this other dimension that was important outside of my TJ association. But when I first got to know her, she was back at TJ, and she fit right back in and began to do what she did when she was at Fairfax High School: charm young people into doing their best. And she got kids creative writing, she got them excited, she got them producing, and she did, you know, things that sometimes at other high schools would be seen as bizarre. She walked them off campus, and when she went off campus, she took them over to Green Springs, and they wrote about nature. They communed with each other and the flowers and the shrubs and the sky. And she helped imbue in those students a love of poetry, self-expression, and creativity. And that's what I'll remember about her, was that kind of love of education. And it was obvious when I went to look back at her yearbook and newspaper career at Longwood, and I found a bunch of articles about what she did. I saw the breadth of her writing over just the senior year. Articles alone were funny. She wrote about being bored on campus. She wrote a very amusing article, being bored on campus. And what do you do if you're at Longwood and there's nothing to entertain you? And she wrote about Christmas, and she was in part of the May Day celebrations. And you have to remember, Longwood at that time was an all-women's college. And later on, I went to Radford and had a very similar experience to her. And so going to a state teachers college just helped her, I think, develop a love and a passion for education. And so I'm hoping that out there in the wide world, there are former students of Bettie's who are carrying forward that love of education that she had. And maybe some of them have a passion for writing as well. But she will be missed. She was missed when she left here. And I'm glad to see so many of her friends and former colleagues in attendance. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Next, I'd like to welcome Gianna Menendez, one of Bettie's former students.
Hello, everyone. I first met Miss STEGALL in 2001 when I first started at Thomas Jefferson. It was the second or third week of school, and we were going to one of those 8th period activity events where you had all the tables set up and you got to see all the different activities available throughout the year. And I went straight for the yearbook table because I was really interested in participating, and Miss STEGALL was set up there with all of her stuff. And she was starting new in the yearbook as well. And she had big visions for what she wanted to do with it over the next several years. And I stayed and chatted with her at the yearbook table for, I think, the entire event. I don't even think I finished walking around the room. And I ended up doing yearbook that year as the freshman editor. We were in this sad little corner closet room off of the cafeteria. If anyone remembers, there was like 2 lunch lines. In the middle, there was this like little room that they shoved 3 computers in and put the yearbook staff in. But we had such a great time working together and putting her vision into practice of what the yearbook could become. And it went from a good high school yearbook to, under her direction, just tons of great writing, tons of great photography, 300 pages of full color. That is quite a monumental feat for high school students to put together. She was a huge advocate for all of her students, as we've heard in other activities, but also for the yearbook staff. And she managed to get us out of the closet in the cafeteria pretty quickly. And we branched out to a computer lab on the 2nd floor, where we were able to have a bigger staff and better computers and more room to spread out the delightful meals that she would bring us, and her incredible baked goods. For anyone who did not know, Miss STEGALL was an incredible baker and would bring cakes and pastries and all sorts of fun things for the yearbook staff to motivate us and keep us going. I also, of course, had the opportunity to take her literature class in my 4th year, and I can attest to the skill that she had, not only as an advisor in the yearbook, but also as a teacher. We had the obligatory Green Springs trip, which was a great adventure. We also went up to DC to see Waiting for Godot, which was one of her favorites. I remember carpooling with her up for that trip as well. She was always so enthusiastic about whatever she was doing and passionate about whatever she was doing, and she did it in a way that was infectious to everyone around her. It wasn't like oppressive or stifling. She made everyone else around her as enthusiastic and excited about whatever she was doing, and she pushed for all of us to be able to do incredible things. And she was I'm sorry. Miss STEGALL was my mentor through all of high school. And college. And I kept in touch with her until very recently I was able to have a conversation with her about my life and how things are going in New York this summer. And she will be very missed.
Thank you, Gianna. It was very touching. All right, next I'd like to invite up another former colleague, Judy Grumbacher, who got to know Betty during some of the earlier years when TJ first began. Judy?
Gianna, Betty kept a picture of save the date of you and your then fiance on her refrigerator. She considered you sort of the poster person for what a background in the humanities can do to produce an excellent physician. And she delighted in pointing that out to anyone, anytime someone suggested that the humanities didn't have a role to play in a school for the science and technology. Several of Betty's former colleagues that were not able to be here today sent me brief comments that they asked that I share with you this afternoon. From Shirley Bloomquist, the former guidance director. Betty defines dedication and devoted to TJ. She was a superb teacher who developed and strengthened many students' writing, as well as stimulated a love for writing. Betty leaves a legacy at TJ for excellent teaching, coaching, and being a yearbook advisor. She was also a teacher friend to students. Betty always gave extra time, talent, and treasure. I recall the delicious treats and cakes she prepared for Laura Malcolm's baby shower in the College Career Center. Betty was a giver. From Pam Curtis, a colleague in the humanities department. Betty was a teacher, and she wrote that in capital letters. She taught us all by example to be more generous, more thoughtful, and more caring of each other and of our students. She also made the best birthday cakes in the world. My grandson still has a picture of the Elmo cake Betty made hanging on the wall in his room, and he's a cool 8th grader now. Betty would brighten any room she entered. Her colleagues and students loved her. What better tribute is there than that? I miss her, and I will always treasure her friendship. And from Nancy Dungan, another director of guidance, I remember how she helped new faculty members negotiate classes, students, and administrators to learn the school and staff in a caring way. Her love of the school was given to us. Betty STEGALL was a dedicated teacher, a track coach, a yearbook advisor, and a dear friend. I met Betty the first year I was at TJ. In those days, we had a common lunchroom, which later became the yearbook room. So there was mingling between the upstairs and downstairs faculties. I said something about never quite knowing what to fix for dinner or for lunch. The next day, Betty showed up in the lunchroom with a BLT sandwich for me to take home for dinner. It took me over a month to convince her that I wouldn't starve if she stopped bringing me dinner. As a compromise, we agreed to go out to dinner several times a month, a practice we continued until the last week of her life. When I showed Betty Songs from Unsung Worlds, a collection of poems about science, she suggested we do an interdisciplinary project with my physics and her writing students. That was the first of several such projects we inflicted on her students. I also remember her delight in telling me about an assignment she had given her students to introduce a poetry unit. She had them all go home and tell their parents that they had decided to become poets. And then they were to write about their reactions to that. Before I found my way into physics, I had been a liberal arts major and an undergraduate, and believed that the arts and humanities gave the sciences a philosophical in addition to their mathematical underpinnings. I think it was that shared belief that was the real basis of our friendship, and that we also disliked the same things in the same people. We were always recommending books and movies to each other. When she discovered that I had never read Thomas Wolfe, she declared it a major character flaw. One summer, while at a physics conference in North Carolina, I went to Asheville, walked around all the Thomas Wolfe places, and tried to read Look Homeward Angel, but I couldn't make myself finish it. I don't know if I ever confessed to that or just let her think that I was reading Thomas Wolfe. Thank goodness she never found out I'd never read Jane Austen. I had just finished reading A Man Called Ulf, or Ulfred, and I knew she would love it. I was going to get my phone to tell Betty about the book when I got the call from her sister telling me she had died. At some point, Betty became a member of our family. She got my mother to write again. She started a program to get older people to write their memories. And she began to spend Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter with us. She always insisted on bringing something, actually several somethings. It was strange not to have her at our Thanksgiving table this year and her apple caramel cake. She also adopted my cats. She would visit them, feed them, and talk to them when I had to be out of town. And when she was at my house, the cats would rush over to her as soon as she was in the house, completely ignoring me. One summer, we decided to go to England and Italy. We thought it would be great to leave on the last day of school, thinking how great it would be to tell all of our friends, well, yeah, we're going to Italy tonight. Forgetting all the things you have to do to check out of school for the summer. And somehow we made it to the airport on time, but with very little time to spare. One evening after dinner, we were walking around Sorrento, and at every outdoor cafe, we saw large groups of people massed around TVs. Occasionally, we'd hear cheers. And we also noticed that most of the shops were fairly empty, so we took that opportunity to improve the European economy. As we were walking in what was normally a pedestrian area, we were almost run over by cheering crowds, shouting, waving flags, setting off air horns, and speeding around on scooters and motorcycles. At the hotel, we discovered that Italy had won the World Cup quarterfinals. The next time the Italians played, we were in Venice. We looked all over for a place to watch, finally deciding to watch at our hotel. And when we got to the Campo by our hotel, we saw a jumbo screen set up. So we sat down and watched the Italians win the semifinals. Before that, I'd always thought that soccer was sort of boring. But sitting there in the Campo, surrounded by cheering Italians, I decided there might be something to soccer after all. We watched Italy win the World Cup in London. Before watching the game, we picked up food to have during the match. I had Subway, she had a KFC. And we regretted that we hadn't tried to buy one of the posters we'd seen all over Rome of some of the Italian players advertising men's underwear. We went to Harrods and bought gifts for her great-nephews, had tea at the British Museum, went to Highgate Cemetery and Stonehenge, and saw Mamma Mia in the West End. We talked about taking another trip, but we never managed to do it. Betty was one of the first to visit my granddaughter after she was born. Looking at her spindly little legs, Betty announced she'd make a good runner. So far, Sophie has proven Betty correct. She runs fast, faster than we can keep up with her. Betty adored Sophie, and Sophie loved Betty. She loved that Betty would give her rides on her walker and play with her. The last time we had lunch with her, Sophie insisted on sitting with Betty. For much of her last year, Betty had battled a series of health problems. But in the week or two before she died, she seemed to be getting better and stronger. She was working with a trainer and was optimistic about getting better. We planned to watch the conventions and the election returns together. I drove her home after our last lunch, and we sat in her kitchen, as we had so many times, and talked about nothing in particular. She was happy, and I find comfort in knowing that. She was a dear friend, and I miss her. At the end of Charlotte's Web, Will remembers his wonderful friend Charlotte. He says it's rare to find someone who is a good friend and a good writer. Betty, like Charlotte, was both.
Thank you, Judy. Betty was such a great friend to so many of us, and it's very clear from your memories that she was a lifelong friend. I have another video to share with you, and this was from the TJ's 25th anniversary celebration. She was one of our speakers, and there's a couple clips that I wanted to share with you to point out, part of her work was to try and encourage her mother to continue to write, or to encourage people to come into our school and to teach them how to type so they can capture stories. Because she wanted to capture the story of TJ. So here she is talking a little bit about it.
About how the book came about, how it's set up, and how you can get a copy of it. I first got the afternoon, so I headed down to the cafeteria where the yearbook room and get it set up because the kids were going to start working during the summer. As I was going into the yearbook room, Harry Smith, our wonderful custodian, was coming out with one of those huge dumpsters that shaped like an oversized bathtub, and it was filled to the gills. And I said, Harry, what's that? And he said, well, I was just told to throw it away. And inside were pictures, negatives, scrapbooks, CDs, everything. And I said, well, just turn it around and put it back in there. I think I need to look through that first. So I started looking through it, and it was pictures that dated back all the way to 1985. And so I said, well, this is a project. So I started archiving the pictures. It actually took me 7 years to archive the pictures and scan the ones that weren't digital and make them digital. And now we have over 1 million pictures on external drives that will be in the new building. They have a
one more clip.
Stories thus far to document TJ's history. There are only 4 more stories I need to write. As I tell the stories of how Jefferson evolved from 1984 to 2011, I stay away from heavy-duty facts and politics. What struck me as I interviewed people for these stories was how powerfully their memories and stories, their work and revelations shaped the school and also shaped how positively the world views us. The second part of the book is for people who don't like to read stories.
Because I wanted all of us to remember how much Betty cherished not only telling stories, but capturing the gems of this school and people's lives in this school. So I had a chance to work with Betty for a couple of years, and initially, as I started as the principal in 2006, and I was blessed to continue working with her for 9 years, 8-9 years after that, because Betty was so committed to capturing the history of our school, taking thousands of pictures and digitizing them so that other people can view them. What other people saw as something that would be discarded, she saw as a gem, that she believed there was something to keep. Now, Betty had talked about writing a book, and she had captured a lot of stories about our school. The book, hadn't yet been published, but she has all these memories and stories that people have written. She would ask students to interview people to talk about the foundation of our school. And that was all captured thanks to her work and all the people that she worked with. But it wasn't just about stories and where Betty saw something that no one else thought was important, but needed to be cherished. Even hearing about the yearbook room, I remember that yearbook room. And it was also true about her classroom. So so most classrooms are about 700 square feet, and a science classroom is larger than that. you know, because of all the equipment. But Bettie's room was like 400 square feet, maybe even smaller. I mean, everyone. So, you know, when it came time to using that room, someone had to use it, and no one really thought that they could teach in a 400 square foot room. And Bettie was like, no problem. And she had a square table, right? And everyone sat in the perimeter, just crammed in there. And she created this ambiance. So she took something that no one else wanted and made it great. She knew how to look at something and saw a special part of it that no one else saw, and she made it special and memorable for so many students. You know, people talked about her bringing different treats, baked goods, and dinners and so forth. She did that with everyone. I mean, we referred to it as the Bettie cake, because when it was your birthday, it would be a Bettie cake. Or, I mean, even when it was my kid's birthday, my kids would get a Bettie cake. It was unbelievable and how generous she was in caring with other people. And we talk about this notion of random acts of kindness in humanity, of trying to be uplifting as a person. And Bettie, I think, was very intentional about her acts of kindness, and she spread that to everyone. She did an amazing job of bringing people together and caring for people who were having trouble. I mean, there were kids who were having trouble at home, and she saw that. And she, you know, reached out and helped kids. I believe that she's helped kids into college because she believed that they could graduate. You know, in the mid-'80s, as has been shared with me, when this school, Thomas Jefferson High School, turned into Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology, there were a core staff that transferred to stay with the kids who went to Annandale High School. You see, two years of the students were allowed to finish out, and 2 years of the students went, relocated to Annandale High School. And you can imagine how stressful and difficult that was for students. And at the same time, how exciting it was to create a new school here that was very unique. And so some teachers had to make a sacrifice to go to Annandale High School because they felt that sacrifice was necessary. Finding a way to stay with the kids so that they could finish high school on an uplifting note. And she was so connected. She just knew. She knew when people were struggling, and she found a way to help them realize that they themselves were a gem. She would tell me stories about the impact of different speakers we had at our school. She would, whether it's through her assignments or through her classroom discussions, but whenever that happened, she always shared with me an essay that she thought was a turning point in a student's academic career that impacted them personally, that helped them realize their broader purpose. And I cherished those times when she would share those intimate, special moments about kids doing remarkable things. So, what I remember most about Bettie is that she knew how to identify a gem when no one else saw that. And I think that's why she's so special to so many of us. She found a way to connect to us. She found a way to dig kids out of the trenches when they were having a difficult time in their life. And then she found ways of uplifting us when you didn't expect it. But she knew it would make a difference. That was just such a really neat lady that I'll never forget getting to know. How are we doing on the pictures? Oh, we have them. Okay. So now I think what we'd like to do is we're going to put on a rotating slideshow so you can see a bunch of pictures. And while we do that, I want to invite people up to the mic to share their memories. There's no specific order. You just come on up and share any memory in particular that showed the impact that Bettie STEGALL had on your life.
a colleague in the humanities division, and she was, as everyone has already said, a very wonderful person. But there's one thing that I don't know how many people fully appreciate about Betty that I did, and that was her work with the diversity committee here at TJ. TJ is not a school that is noted for its large number of certain underrepresented minorities, especially Hispanics and African Americans. And one of the things that the PTSA has done to try to help that is to start a essentially tuition-free diversity test prep program, because so many of the students who are successful in getting here go through private test prep programs that charge money. And that's where I really came to know Betty, because for years, both while she taught here and even after she retired, Saturday after Saturday, she would bring back essays that students had written who were in that program trying to get into TJ, and she was there trying to help them improve their writing so that they would have a better chance to succeed in that effort. And that just impressed me tremendously about her. She did this in a very quiet, unassuming way. I'm not sure that how many of her colleagues even knew that she did this. She would have, I don't know how many essays every week that she would return to these students, but this was work for which she was not compensated. It was work for which no one was giving her accolades, but it was work that she thought was important. And I very much appreciated that about her.
My name is Chuck Sane. I'm a former biology teacher here. I worked in the old school with Betty. She and I both spent 25 years in this building. Several things have been mentioned that I want to capture just briefly here. One is how she liked to write stories about other people. And something came to my mind, and I'm still waiting for that story. I want to see what she did with it. Dennis McFadden taught geology, earth science, and biology. And Jeff Jones was our principal for a while. Jeff Jones and Dennis and myself, we used to go on fossil hunts in West Virginia. We did some caving, and it was a place where we liked to eat late Sunday evening before we returned to Fairfax County. Now, when you go through a cave or you do fossil hunting, you get a little bit messy. So we went to the stream nearby and went skinny dipping to get clean and change clothes before we went to the restaurant. I told Betty about that. She just hooted. And she said, I can't wait to write that story. And I'm still waiting to see that. I'd give anything to know what she did with it. The word generosity was mentioned. She had a beautiful place at Rehoboth Beach, and she was very generous with that. My wife and I had an opportunity to spend at least 2 mini vacations over there, free of charge. She just allowed us to go over and use it. Photography, I remember her working for National Geographic one summer on the West Coast, and as well as I remember, and maybe somebody can refresh my memory, she took 30 rolls of film up and down the California coast, Washington, Oregon, and that area. And I think the best one so far is her creativity. I was down in the biology department, the old school, and one day as a group of students came through, some of them were on their all four, some of them were nudging each other, but all of them were barking and doing various things that you'd expect a group of dogs to do. Well, they were kind of interfering with teaching in the area, so I went out to find out what was happening. Betty STEGALL had assigned a creative writing project. Go around the building, pretend you're a dog, and then you come back and write about it.
Before I start and
Principal Glazer, maybe you got the best answer to this question. What is the statute of limitations for punishment for skipping? Because it's like over like 10-ish years. Anyway, all right, I'll just go for it. Mike Stryer, I'm a class of '01. My wife was teaching class of '02, and we started dating my senior year. I went off to the Naval Academy. I was going through the ringer of the freshman year at the Naval Academy, and was on my spring break. I was really only going to get one day to spend some time with my at the time girlfriend, who didn't know she was going to become my wife, but I was just going to get that one kind of Friday with her, maybe get to see her a little bit on Saturday. And I thought, I'll come back and visit TJ and meet her in class or whatever. My wife was taking the creative, girlfriend at the time, was taking the creative writing class with Miss STEGALL, which I'd enjoyed the year before. And Miss STEGALL, she knew me. She remembered without a problem, and she kind of took a look at me, took a look at Annalisa, and she got this little twinkle in her eye, and she said, "Hey, Annalisa, don't you have that writing lab you should be working on?" And she pretty much kicks us out of her classroom and says, "Get out of here." And so I got an extra afternoon with the woman who became my wife. And that's the great thing about Miss STEGALL, not just a fantastic educator, but somebody who understood that education and a class, it can't get in the way of life. It's got to be complementary to it, and sometimes you got to stop what's going on in the classroom to let life happen.
And I'm one of the counselors here, and my memory of Betty is her being a sanctuary. I remember seeing students, I'd be here late at night when I first started, and I'd be seeing students who were middle school students, not just on weekends, but during the week, and they were here working with her in creative writing and yearbook type issues and writing in general. These were the African American and Hispanic students. And because of their experiences with her, even before they got here, they were totally comfortable and prepared, and they wanted to be here because they knew that Betty was here and that they could do it. So my memory of her was being a person who made them feel comfortable, gave them a sanctuary, and made them know that this place was for them as well.
In '88, and got to know Betty. I can always remember you'd find things in your mailbox. Sometimes it was cakes, sometimes it was pictures. And on my birthday, I'd always find my lunch. She was just a very, very special lady. A year ago this time, my son passed away. And last winter, Betty sent me this little poem. And it just, I think it describes her. So I just like to read it. This is a poem Betty sent me last January. So here goes. God didn't promise days without pain, without sorrow or sun, without rain, but he did promise strength for the day, comfort for the tears, and light for the way. God brought that promise to you through Brian. Your son would tell you, I am there, I do not sleep, I am 1,000 winds that blow, I am the diamond glints on snow. When you awake in the morning, listen. I am the swift, uplifting rush of quiet birds in circle flight. I am the soft stars that shine at night. Look about you every day. I'm there. I did not die. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Andrew. I only knew her as Coach STEGALL. Back in the 80s, she was still teaching at Annandale, so I never had the opportunity to attend any of her classes. But she did come here and coach cross country where I first met her, and winter and spring track as well. My first recollection is she was a very tough lady. You had to be tough because you took this motley group of misfits and said, hey, I'll meet you out at Lake Barcroft, or even worse, Accotink, and I'm gonna be waiting there with the stopwatch. So start hauling butt. And we would, and she whipped us into shape, which was fantastic. I'm sure lots of accolades, and again, it was interesting to hear, you're right, we weren't probably the best athletes, but we put everything we had into it, and she was a great motivator in that sense. When I think back, to the invitationals we would go to. We'd go to these meets, they might be in Charlottesville or North Carolina somewhere, and we'd all pile into a big cargo van, and it was just her driving. And there might be 14 of these kids, and these are the true outcasts, right? Like in the 80s, I'm dating myself, but we sing along at full volume to Violent Femme songs, badly, not in tune. And then to go along with it, we had these kazoos, which I tried really hard to find one. But just to picture, that from the Olympics a couple back, where it was that annoying buzzing sound, you'd have like 15 kids buzzing loudly in this thing. And I always remember that story because I have 4 kids now, and whenever I'm driving in the minivan and there are all this chaos, I was like, how did that woman possibly put up? We're not even blood related to her. And yet, and she did, and it was fantastic that she did have not just that toughness that's required to be a coach, but also the patience to sort of put up with all of us and the antics that we all had, which really is how I can kind of tie this together. I ran for her for 4 years, and to my recollection, I don't think she taught here during that time. This is late 80s, early 90s, but it was one of these things where 4 years I ran. I was varsity all 4 years. I was a captain my junior year. So when my senior year came around and it was time to just coast at this point, I walked in and she informed me at the beginning of the season, "You're not going to be the captain." And I was like, how is that even possible? I mean, I run, I'm one of your best runners, I've always been here. And the lesson she was trying to teach me was, you have to be dedicated to it. And, looking back, I was an insufferable little jerk in my senior year. I had discovered the opposite sex. I was dating a girl that went to college. I was not interested in going to invitational meets. I was interested in going down to William and Mary for my weekends. And she was right. And it was something where, at the time we had a falling out. I still ran for her, but there was a lot of friction between us. And at the end of the season, I think winter or spring, we had a successful season. Maybe not cross country. That was a rebuilding year for us. But I remember at the very end of the year, I was kind of down in the dumps. It's like, hey, we're all going off to different schools. I'm not going to see. This is, a lot of tight friendships that had developed over the time here. And she said, well, you'll see them all at Beach Week. And I was like, well, I can't go to Beach Week. I can't afford to go to Ocean City and stuff. I'm trying to save my money to go to college. And she's like, hey, you can stay at my place. I've got a beach house. You can go there, take your friends from the team that aren't going. So, 4 of us did. We piled into a car that probably wasn't even street legal, but it was what we had. We drove out there. I think it actually broke down on the way back. But it was okay because the engine was overheating, and someone's smart TJ was like, well, just run the heater at full blast and that'll keep the engine from overheating. God, that was a tough ride. But at the end of it all, I remember, coming back to her, and I wish I had the opportunity now to say that, this is a little bit of a cliche, but life's lessons aren't taught in a classroom. And although I'm jealous of those of you that had her as a teacher or as a yearbook advisor, I had her for 4 years, 3 seasons of sports each year. And through that, there was a lot of maturation, and that didn't really culminate until after I had long since left here. But at least she got me on the right track, and it was humbling, and it was a difficult experience. But I will always be thankful for Coach STEGALL for that. She was a fantastic mentor outside of the classroom. So that's my thoughts. Thank you.
I took Mrs. STEGALL's creative writing class in 2005, and I remember there were a lot of times at TJ that were challenging, but I would see her in the hallways, and with a word or two, she'd always turn it around and make you feel like a person of value. And she had a knack for doing that. It sounds like she did that for a lot of people. And she had a wicked sense of humor as well. I think the way she saw the world was very clear. I always wish I could have gotten a little more of that from her. And I remember we went to this play once, Arena Stage in DC. And on the way back from seeing that play, she just said that was really terrible. I'm embarrassed that I took you all there. And I always appreciated her honesty.
Betty was really important to me when I first arrived. One of the Judy Grunbacher's testimonies was pointing out that she was a mentor for new faculty, and that was certainly the case with me. She told me, she showed me how the school ran. She told me where the bodies were buried, as it were. And she was just enormously helpful. One of her colleagues once referred to her creative writing class as the class of misfit toys. And at the time, it was intended as a kind of like a little bit of an acidic remark. And at the time, I was a little bitter because it made me realize that I was one of the misfit toys since she'd been so important to me. But as I've been sitting here, I've been thinking, yeah, that was probably true, and that was actually a good thing. It was one of the things that was really great about Betty. Like a lot of people, I was the recipient of cakes and gumbo. She would regularly bring me these tubs of gumbo or jambalaya or whatever, and that I wasn't even sure I wanted, but I was just like couldn't believe how generous she was, and she was just like that with everyone. The first time I met Betty, she suggested that we meet here at TJ at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, so that she could kind of like show me, some things with the way the writing program worked. We were both teaching making language and composition. So I arrived at 2 o'clock, and she wasn't here, and so I waited for half an hour, and then I waited for an hour, and she didn't arrive. And at first, as a new teacher, I thought, well, I must have messed things up. I must have not kept track properly. And then I came to realize that this was Betty, that she did this kind of thing all the time, that she took too much on. Like she was coming in on Saturdays, working with students in addition to the students she was already working with. She was constantly taking on more work than anybody could possibly do. Constantly baking cakes for people, constantly cooking them meals and so forth, and she was kind of crotchety and was a little bit high maintenance, and I just valued her so much, and so regret that she's not here. So that's all I wanted.
Hi, I'm not Mrs. Feldman, and I just want to say that if Betty were here, she would hate this. There's no way you could thank her. She did not take thanks the way you would think she would. I think she knew she was loved. I think she knew she was appreciated. But she was a curmudgeon in that way, and only that way. So what's going up to her now is sheer love and gratitude.
My name is Jason Oliver. I was class of 99 here, a handful of us here. Thanks for letting me know about this, you guys. So I had Coach STEGALL as a freshman in cross country. I'm not sure, I weighed 85 pounds. And she had those cookies. Seems like every day. I remember them every day. And I always wanted to eat about 12 because I was dying from cross country. But you can't eat many cookies when you just ran farther than you've ever run. And it's hot. And one day she had, I don't even remember who I was with, but a handful of us, we were probably 9th and 10th graders, and we finished the 3-mile run. I think it's Spring Valley, something like that. It goes out the back, goes around. There's a lot of nods out there. And it was the first time she asked us to run that, and it was the farthest I'd run. And we got back, we said, yeah, Coach, we ran Spring Valley. And we talked about the curmudgeon in her, and she looked right at us and she said, great job, boys. Tomorrow it's Dodson, which is 4 miles. And I remember all of us sort of collapsed and thought we were going to die right then. And then she came over. She kind of turned away from us, and then she came back and she had the cookies, and she believed we could do it the next day. So
I'm Abby Adams, class of 2001, and I was in writing seminar with Mike. And I'm one of those students who came to TJ as a humanities kid. I thought of myself as a writer. I loved writing. I was so excited to take a writing seminar. Miss STEGALL taught me how to be a fantastic writer by teaching the iterative craft of writing. Writing just doesn't spring from your head fully formed, it has to be sculpted. But the most important thing that she taught me in that class was that everyone is a writer. If you see, if you live, if you experience life, you have something worth writing about and worth being read. And that is a very powerful lesson that I have taken with me for the rest of my life.
A story that I remember. So when Betty retired, she didn't want to be recognized in the program. And I think that doesn't surprise some of us in the audience. She didn't like any attention brought in her direction. And I thought that was such a shame that because 47 years in Fairfax County, that alone deserves a standing ovation. The impact that she's had on tens of thousands of students deserves a standing ovation. The impact that she's had on hundreds and hundreds of staff, cutting across disciplines, deserves a standing ovation. So Betty and I, probably it's the only time we quarreled, where we, I love this woman, but I didn't know what to do. So we found a compromise that I'd list her name on the program. She literally she just wanted to go quietly. And I struggled over that because she had such a profound impact. And I was so pleased that, at least reading her name among the staff, she received an ovation because she didn't want to draw that attention to herself. I actually thought in planning this event, so we didn't plan this event in the late summer when she passed away because the auditorium was under construction, and we wanted a way to recognize her and have people come back and visit and find a good time to do that and remember her life. And the auditorium was supposed to be done a month ago, and it still wasn't done. And in fact, it still isn't done. And I thought, Betty's stopping me from recognizing her. What is she doing? But thanks to our tech crew and their diligent working behind the scenes and coming up with an alternative approach, I believe that Betty now has received the recognition that she deserves. So I want to thank you for coming and sharing the stories. Oh, it was so great to hear them. She's such a special lady. And some of you have asked, where are those stories that she has? So Betty's legacy will continue. You saw in the video she has thousands of photos. She has many yearbooks that her and her students have put together, and she has hundreds, if not thousands, of stories that have been put together by people. I haven't read the one about skinny dipping, but I have read some of them and have had the opportunity to see them. At the completion of the construction, one of the final rooms that will be developed is an archives room. And that'll be a great place to showcase Betty's work. All the artifacts that we have collected. And you saw in the video, this is the 25th anniversary celebration. This was many years ago. And she had the vision that we need to collect the history of our school and get people to share their stories and pull them together. Well, they're all pulled together, and they're kind of in storage right now. But at the completion of the building, which should happen, around March, we'll be able to bring out all those materials and put them in an archives room for everyone to see, so that her legacy will go on. And that any of our students and teachers, when they were here, will have a chance to look at different drawers and videos and computer screens and take a look at all the things that she's collected, along with her colleagues. Pat Groves and Betty had many conversations about archives. I know they've drawn in Carolyn and Jay as people who would be a valuable resource in trying to fit things together. There's so many great memories about this school. There's so many great memories about Betty, and I'm glad we'll be able to put them together in this archives. So when we complete this school this year, this school year, I hope you come back to read those stories, to see those pictures, and to relive those memories. I want to thank everyone for coming today. Have a great weekend.